Hey, I'm Steve Magnante in Burlington, North Carolina, amidst Chrysler, Dodge, Plymouth, and DeSoto racing royalty. This here is a 1958 Chrysler 300D, the second and final year for the mighty 392 Hemi under the hood of the letter series Chrysler. For 1959, the 413 Wedge would appear, and again, this is a very special example. This was raced by Norm Thatcher, a Van Nuys, California speed racer who raced at Muroc, El Mirage, Bonneville in this very car. It's largely unrestored and in as-raced condition. One thing that's really weird about this one, it's one of two 3-speed manual equipped Chrysler 300Ds built in 1958. Now the manual transmissions in Chrysler 300s are scarce as hen's teeth. The vast majority had push-button transmissions, automatics, torque flights, power flights, and this is a manual transmission car. I guess it was built for racing at Bonneville, Muroc, and El Mirage. So with that said, let's take a peek under the hood and see what makes this one so unusual. Behold the mighty Chrysler Whale engine. That's what enthusiasts call it. It was so big, massive engines. Probably weighs about 750 pounds, all cast iron, even the manifold, the intake manifold. And again, standard equipment on the 300D and all letter series cars of this era was solid lifters with adjustable rocker arms underneath these Chrysler Firepower rocker covers. Of course, cast iron manifold with a couple of Carter WCFB 4-barrel carburetors under unsilenced air filters right there. Now again, the less is more nature of this car. It was born for racing. It does not have power steering, no power brakes, which are things that would be commonly found on a luxurious 300D because they were the executive supercar. This one has a radio. That's about the only option it has. But with that said, the heater delete plate right here on the firewall is present and accounted for. It's been there since day one when this car rolled off the plant assembly line, 1958. Also the manual brakes down there, no power booster on that side of the firewall, so it's very austere. And again, it's about less being more. This has heavy duty brakes, as all 300Ds did, heavy duty rims, with no hubcaps on these things, because at Muroc or El Mirage, you did not want the wheel covers to fly off the vehicle, or Bonneville, or anywhere for that matter. The Beach Boys sang about lake pipes, and here it is right here in effect. These things here could be uncorked with the twist of 2 bolts to let the Hemi breathe without the intrusion of mufflers, which you don't need in a wide open speed run. And that's the lakes pipe right there on each side of the engine, coming out toward the rocker panel. On the inside, it has the standard Chrysler 300D leather interior, and again, less can be more, but with that said, this was not that much heavier than a standard vinyl bench seat up front, but this is original equipment. But the crazy part in this thing is the 3-speed manual transmission, and apparently, if we look in there, we'll see that the shifter comes through the floor. I was thinking it would be a column shift, but no. The 2 of these things that were built have a very specific shifter right there, which pops up out of the transmission tunnel, but not in the middle, like on a Roadrunner of the 60s, but basically there it is right there on display. Only 2 of these things were built with the manual, the 3-speed manual transmission. It's not a 4-speed, it's a 3-speed, no overdrive on these things. What they would do is they would adjust the rear axle ratio, probably around a 210 or a 200 to 1 gear ratio to allow peak speed on at the top of the racing surface. But again, we see here the Virgil Exner forward look styling right here in full bloom, and the tail fin era. Again, Chrysler just starting to get into it right here, and the tail fins on this thing are beautiful, baked into the car, shared with other Chryslers, smaller cars. But with that said, none of those had the mighty 300D logo here. Now, if you didn't know, Chrysler called the 300 series the beautiful brute, and they were beautiful, and they were brutes. They were sort of executive supercars, and Norm Thatcher knew his muscle cars and supercars very well. He raced a lot of Chrysler Corporation vehicles, Dodges and Plymouths, and Chryslers into the mid-60s, including 64 Plymouths with race Hemis and superchargers on them. Scan those things, you look at those on YouTube, you'll find there's pictures of those in magazines. And speaking of magazines, this car had a lot of magazine exposure. Let's go to this panel here. As we can see, Norm Thatcher's 1958 Chrysler 300D got a lot of coverage in various magazines. And one of the big places was as advertising fodder for aftermarket speed equipment companies like Wyand, who sold and manufactured the linkage for the multiple carburetor system here. And you can imagine the headaches involved with trying to synchronize those carburetors. But there's Norm Thatcher right there with the 6 carburetor, or actually 8 carburetor manifold right there, sold by Wyand. And over here we see some roller lifter information, and here's another shot here. Apparently he had Isky roller cams, or roller parts in this vehicle, and help it make go. And again, another Wyand ad right here showing the various Dragstar manifolds with a bunch of carbs. More carbs is better. This is before the days of a big Holly 4-barrel or a Dominator, decades before that. And with that said, you could put a bunch of Strombergs on an engine and give it better breathing potential, courtesy of Wyand and their aluminum intake manifolds. Also, we see here flywheel manufacturers. He has eel code right here, and of course 3-speed manual in his car, so a heavy-duty clutch and flywheel would have been needed. And here's a picture of Thatcher and his team here with this very car that we're looking at now, with an exotic intake manifold right here, and again plumbed by, or coupled to the transmission by an Eelco flywheel and linkage system. And going further down here, again Wyand, we have here more clutch information from Wyand. I didn't know they made intakes, but clearly this advertisement shows that they probably did clutches and stuff. Now, in the next panel here, we have photographs of this car in action. And this is Norm Thatcher right here. I think he was like 65, maybe even 70 when he was driving these things. And he had a shop in Van Nuys, California. And here's Norm Thatcher with one of his guys, D Experimental 252. And this car is one of two, again, 3-speed manuals. Now this was never used, and this is one of Norm's other engines. It's a supercharged Chrysler Hemi with a bunch of carbs on top. This was not installed in this car ever. With that said, here's the DX gas coupe Norman Thatcher, 141.08 miles per hour on May 25th, 1958 at El Mirage, Dry Lakes, just outside of Los Angeles. And there he is with his team right there, waiting for the crew. And here's the car being transported to and from the location. I don't know how they got it on or off that stake bed, but appropriately enough has a Dodge Power Giant truck, 6-wheel truck. And down here we have, here's a sign here, closed, gone to Bonneville, sign at Norm's Garage in Van Nuys. Gone to Bonneville Speed Trials, back open again September 3rd. And here's Bonneville Salt Flats right here in Wendover, Utah. Historic place then as now, still functional. And here's the car at Bonneville. And the thing with Bonneville, it was a salt flat. And you can see the white salt right here. And the thing with Bonneville, everybody who races there prays for a dry month, because otherwise that turns into a marsh. Slush, you can't race on that. So if you get a dry year, you can go racing. And that's clearly what's been done here. And down here we see more pictures. There's the car in the background, along with a 56 Ford, a Roadster of some type, but that's the one we care about right there, number 252E. That's Norm Thatcher's car. Here's the car at speed. In 2014, they brought it back, sort of as a reunion for the car. And there it is right there, restored. And that's the story of the record-setting Chrysler 300D, driven by Norm Thatcher at Bonneville and also at El Mirage in the late 50s, early 60s. And here it is right here, unrestored. The original paint on this car went 150-something miles per hour back in the day, and it's still unrestored. Beautiful car. Standing in front of a 1959 Imperial convertible, one of 555 built. Now, don't call it a Chrysler Imperial, because Imperial was its own division from 1955 through 1975. So technically it's an Imperial, not a Chrysler Imperial. It would be an Imperial by Chrysler Corporation to be totally correct. But again, it's one of 555. Big year for 1959 was the addition of something under the hood. Now, before this, the Imperial and the Chryslers, the big ones, would have a Hemi, a 392 or a 354 or 331, depending on the year, going back to 1951. But for 1959, the mighty 413 Wedge arrived under the hood. And the thing with this is it was a less expensive engine to produce for Chrysler, no double rocker shafts, no expensive machining for the combustion chambers. The Wedge was a pretty good engine for what it is and was. And this also was the underpinnings right here of the Chrysler 440. Of course, the Max Wedge engines with different cylinder heads and intake manifolds. But again, the mighty 413 tall deck Wedge starts right here in 1959. Now, one thing about these do have is a full frame. 1960 would be the year for unit construction on pretty much every Chrysler vehicle, but Imperial remained body on frame through the 1965 model year. 1966 or 7, I believe it was, they went to unitized construction. But this is a body-on-frame car. And with a convertible body or body type, you want a full frame, because otherwise you might get some pretty severe cowl shake and oscillations on such a long and heavy car as this. So it's a full frame car right here with torsion bars up front, which debuted in 1957 on all Chrysler Corporation vehicles, including Imperial. And here it is right here, beautifully restored 413 wedge, I believe 350 horsepower. That's the standard rating. No dual quads on these, no tunnel rams or long rams. These were all single 4-barrel. And again, just a quiet thumper of an engine that got this car moving down the road quite readily and happily without any problems at all. No need for adjusting the solid lifters, because he has hydraulic lifters. So basically a single 4-barrel, a silenced air cleaner with a single snorkel, and this is air conditioning, factory AC on this one here. So it's loaded, even has cruise control, the Bendix cruise control, the structure right there in head of the power brake booster bellows right there. That silver thing is a Bendix, a very early cruise control, no computers at all, but very, very crisp restoration. And restoring a car like this with the AC and all these features is time consuming, and if those parts are missing or lost, it's a problem. But this is beautifully restored, and I'm sure they started with a very, very crisp example of the breed. This one also has the optional Kelsey Hayes wire wheels, chrome wheels right here, which were first seen in 1954, I believe, on certain Chryslers, full-size Chryslers, and were optional for many years on these full-size cars as well. Beautiful wheels, not being fused with the wheels used on Thunderbirds in the 1960s. But again, these are large, heavy-duty wheels. The real spokes, nothing fake here, no clip-on covers. That's real and beautiful stuff. And the chrome is eye-watering and mouth-watering too. So inside the car, we'll see the obligatory push-button transmission. On the left-hand side of the steering wheel, we'll see the push-button pod right there. We can see that it has drive, neutral, reverse, 2, 1. And basically the idea there is that there's a cable that's attached to the backside of that. It goes into the transmission where the valve body, there's a rooster comb inside of there. When you push those buttons, the rooster comb actuates the gear chains inside of the transmission. So push-button driving, ease of driving, and basically a very luxurious effect for a very luxurious car. This has a split bench seat up front here, and they're articulated for easier entry and egress to the back seat. Very sporty, leather interior on this car, and even has an early crash pad right here. That's a padded dash. And one thing that I've always been kind of concerned about was the way that Chrysler mounted the rearview mirror on top of the dash. I call it the rib raker. Figure out what that means if you go through the ribs get raked. It's not good. But that is a day-night mirror, which is an unusual thing. I had a 61 Plymouth Savoy, the opposite polar of this car, but that also had the rib raker. The only bummer with that too is that as people in the back seat, you can't look through them with that right there. So later Chrysler would hang it off the top of the windshield frame, and that's also a day-night mirror, the Mirror-matic. Pretty exotic piece. And of course the self-dimming headlights, the pod on top of the dash pad right there, that was the auto dimmer. I believe Autolite supplied those things. Also to Ford used them as well. GM also used those things, but there it is right there for full convenience. No need to dip the headlights on your own. It does it for you. Long before the days of laser and modern vehicles with halon headlights. But that's an analog piece right there. And again, here's the convertible structure right here. 555 of these were built. Certainly as expensive as any Lincoln Continental back in the day. When you have on the back, some people call this the flight sweep, the flight deck, if you will. But there it is. It's an add-on piece to the stock stamping of, but the trunk lid itself is born to take that structure right there. It's built into the design. I like the way the wheel cover is emulated on the back here with this stainless steel structure. Kind of floats a little bit above, but again, great example of Virgil Exner's styling in full bloom. And again, here we have the Exner era fins right here. And Virgil Exner was, of course, a stylist of the first order, very influential throughout Detroit. In fact, his styles in 1957 influenced the 1959 Chevrolet redesign of the full-size Chevy line. They got to look at that. They got away from the 58, sort of the bubble 58 Impala type car, and went right to the fin-equipped 1959-60 Chevrolet. So Virgil Exner influenced GM and Ford stylists with his forward thinking and forward look, literally the forward look. And here's the example of what it takes to restore something like this. All this chrome and stainless steel, all of it's meticulously rendered. There's no pitting. This car must have been very well cared for before it got restored. And here it is in full view at the McCandless Collection in North Carolina. A lot of people remember the 1950s as the great Detroit horsepower race, and each car maker came out with their own special high-performance version. At Chrysler Corporation, Dodge came out with the D500, Chrysler had the 300 letter series, Plymouth had the Fury, and of course at DeSoto, the Adventurer was the hot rod of the DeSoto lineup. Now this is a DeSoto Adventurer convertible, one of 97 built and one of only 12 known to exist still, convertibles. There are two of them here at the McCandless collection, and they're both very similar to this car here. Of course, the Adventurer was a very adventurous car for Chrysler Corporation, which a decade before this was building very, moribund workman-like vehicles with stodgy styling. But for the 1950s, Virgil Exner's styling touch, the forward look, really came into full bloom. Thus the Adventurer. Now, one thing about the Adventurer was the gold inlay, gold effect here at the side strand panels. Of course, the Adventurer logos were here in gold iridite. Of course, the hubcaps even had gold accents, gold tone, so a very, very exotic and expensive looking car. And these were the most expensive DeSotos you could get in 1959 when this one was built as a new car. Now, the money on these cars, to me, is always under the hood. When it comes to Chrysler Corporation's first muscle cars of the 1950s, the DeSoto Adventurer was right there with the 300 and the Dodge Red Ram with multiple carburation standard equipment. And there was 687 Adventurers built in 1959, of which only 97 were convertibles. But all of those 687 Adventurers came standard with the 383 dual quad engine with 350 horsepower. It's a very unusual big block from the Chrysler camp because it's a tall deck block, which most people associate with the 413, the 426 wedge, and the 440 wedge. But also for 59 and 60, you could get the 383 came with a raised deck block to accommodate the extra stroke so that the cylinders could go up and down and not hit the end of the cylinder head. 1958 would have been a 361 short block dual quad motor, so the 59 would be a very different engine. So to find the difference between a 59 tall deck and a 361 short deck of 1958, we go to the front of the block. There's a raised stand right here. It's cast integrally with the block. That thing right there, it doesn't come off. It's baked into the block. That is the pad for the raised deck engine. You see that on all 413s, all 440s, or 426 street wedges, and also on 1959 and 60 383 raised deck engines, which are also used in basic Chryslers. But again, extra stroke, extra displacement, 350 horsepower thanks to those twin Carter AFB 4-barrel carburetors. Now this car is loaded in every possible way. Power brakes right here. And of course, the Adventurer being something of a muscle car, full-size muscle car, long before the GTO came out in '64, these were absolutely capable of handling and cornering and braking and accelerating as well as pretty much any other car in Detroit. But these have heavy-duty suspension, big drum brakes all the way around, and of course the power brake booster right here makes it easier to get the car stopped in a jiffy if you need to. And speaking of jiffy, this thing here on the passenger side is the Jiffy Jet windshield washer. You fill that up with an alcohol water solution, and on snowy weather, not that you want to drive this in snow, that's how you would defrost your windshield and also clean your windshield if you've got bugs on it. So that's called the Jiffy Jet. It's a plastic bag, and you just fill it up with liquid and clean your windshield automatically. But again, crisp presentation under the hood. And of course the grille and the anodized gold here. Standard stuff on every one of those 687 Adventurers built in 1959. Again, this is one of 12 known to still exist. And here at the McCandless collection, there are two of these. They're both black with gold accents. Speaking of the gold accents, let's go around to the side of this car. And one thing that made the Adventurer stand out in a crowd was the engine-turned gold panel along the belt line here. Standard equipment. Very spiffy and very upscale for DeSoto, which was in its next to last year. 1960 would be the end of the line for DeSoto. The sales race it just wasn't winning it. DeSoto was selling big numbers in the earlier 50s, mid-50s too, but by 1960 the wind was out of the sails and DeSoto sailed into the off the horizon. But the back of this shows Virgil Exner's forward look in full bloom with the fins right here. I dare say that any Chevy Bel Air must tip its hat to the DeSoto Adventurer. Beautiful looking car in every way, shape, and form. And here on the deck lid, we have stainless strips right here for luggage, protecting the trunk from luggage damage, just scuffing along. They're basically baked in. And the DeSoto Adventurer with dual exhaust with these tips right here, standard with the Adventurer package, including the gold anodized inlay behind the bumper. And just a great example right here of one of only 97 convertibles built on 1959 DeSoto Adventurer. There's two of them here at McCandless Collection here in North Carolina. It's a beautiful car. This is a 1960 Chrysler 300F. Now we know the Chrysler letter series was very unique in so many ways. 1960 and 61 were similar but not the same. 1960 was the final year for the flight deck right here on the back, sort of, someone called it the pseudo spare tire right there. In 1961 that would go away. Also the taillights we see here in 1960 would be very different from 1961. We'll get to that in the next car. And even the doors were changed in 1961. We can see that this door here has the fin continues right into the door itself. And of course, 1960, the hood has a faux scoop right here. They're vents, but they're not there in 1961. And one thing that appeared from 1960 was the Astrodome dashboard. Big plastic dome right there. Sort of a sci-fi thing that was standard fare on all full-size Chryslers, of course, including the 300 series. Now, moving into 1961, this is a 300G, which has a very different taillight right here. Instead of being integrated into the tail fin, it's around the back of the car. Bumpers are different as well, and the door and fin are quite different. No wrap around here. And a very different 1960 through 61. It's a G convertible, 300G. And of course the Astrodome is still there in the instrument panel. No more faux vents in the hood, a flat hood for 1961. But one thing they both have is the long ram 413 with 375 horsepower. And what these do, basically, this carburetor feeds that bank. This carburetor feeds that bank of the 413 V8 for a mild form of supercharging. And one final detail that 1961 has that 1960 does not is the trapezoidal, the angled headlights right here. The fenders are different, the bumper's different. If we go back to 1960, we'll see that the headlights are arranged horizontally on that tan car. So again, 1960 and 61 Chrysler 300s, similar but not the same. If you didn't know, the man in this picture is Arnie the Farmer Beswick, a legend in the Pontiac drag racing world. So what did he have to do with this 1957 Dodge Coronet D501? Well, simply stated, he was the original owner of this car. He bought it brand new back in April of 1957. Now, what is a D501? Well, basically, it's the most potent Dodge performance car you could get in 1957. And it has the heart of a Chrysler 300B, the chassis and brakes of a Chrysler Imperial, and all those things were baked into these cars for either NASCAR racing or drag racing, and Arnie the Farmer Beswick was a customer of this very car. This is the one he actually ran in 1957 and 58 and even 59 for a period of time. So let's dig in and find out what makes this so special. Beyond the less is more austerity of this car, there's no heater, no radio. Let's check inside. It has a 3-speed manual transmission shifted on the column. And this is the very same steering wheel and same shifter and same brake and clutch and gas pedals that Arnie the Farmer Beswick drove in competition back on drag strips in 1957, 8, and 9. And here it is right here, radio and heater delete, tachometer, sun tack installed right there. Rubber floor mats. It's a very austere two-door sedan body, not a hardtop, not a convertible, although some of these were sold as two-door hardtops. But this is the base model, the sedan, the cheapest one you could get. And again, the 501 was a very special package. And it really starts and stops under the hood, and here's why. This is the same engine used in the 1956 Chrysler 300B, 350 horsepower in this one here, and it's a 354, not the 325, which was the biggest standard engine in a lesser Coronet, the Red Ram 325, but this is a whole different creature. The Chrysler Hemi is the bigger one of them, and the little Red Ram and the DeSoto Firedome are miniature versions of this puppy right here. It's truly a Hemi, dual quads right out of the 300B repertoire, and of course 12-inch Imperial brakes and a 3-speed manual as we saw it. Of course, heater delete on the firewall, the structure, the heater box and the fan motor deleted, covered by those metal plates right there, all that factory equipment back from 1957. Great example, largely unrestored car. So the stickers here onto the hood were probably applied by either Arnie Beswick or Lee Smith, more on him in a second, back in the day. And here they are, Burr graphic piston rings, Bird, there you go, Bird rings, Isnerian camshafts, some Moon equipment here. These stickers, if they could talk, they'd have a lot of stories to tell. And there's a signboard over here which can tell us even more about this car. Here's the original window sticker, the bill of sale, from Eddie Schuler Dodge in Morrison, Illinois, which was Arnie Beswick's hometown. And of course, the price paid was $3,690 back on April 1st, 1957, when Arnie Beswick took this car home. And getting back to the second owner of this car was Lee Smith, who actually was he was at the Aberdeen Proving Grounds in Maryland. Of course, Aberdeen is where the military test tanks, rocket-propelled grenades, all kinds of things like that. So Lee Smith was definitely a gearhead and into high-performance things. Of course, Lee Smith is also one of the guys who took one of the 1965 altered wheelbase Plymouths from Chrysler Corporation, made his name on that one, Lee Smith. So anyway, after Lee Smith, he sold it back to Beswick, who's owned it till in recent years. And here's all the data on the car. This right here is a memo from Chrysler dated January 10th, 1961, sent to Lee Smith, describing what made this D501 so very special. Right here from 1961, when the car was maybe 6 years old, 5 years old. But here it is, all this documentation comes with this car. And again, it's very rare to find something with a high-performance nature like this still intact from its day, largely unrestored. So that's how the Pontiac legend, the tameless Tiger GTO funny car driver of the mid-60s, got his start in a Dodge D501 in 1957, not a Pontiac. When you ordered your Dodge without a heater, Dodge put these block-off plates right here to cover up the fan motor and, of course, the heater core assembly right here, so you didn't have air blowing into the car. That's factory stuff from 1957. Truly, less is more with a D501. To make sure everybody following the D501, Dodge even gave it its own unique, specific trunk emblem. People say the first muscle car was a Pontiac GTO in 1964. I beg to differ. 1955 brought the Chrysler 300, the first American car with 1 horsepower per cubic inch, 331 cubic inches, and dual quads, and that was the standard equipment on this right here. So basically, this is Chrysler's first image car built for high-performance use, and also the first influence of Virgil Exner's styling. And he's had lower lines than the 54s and were much more advanced vehicles in so many ways. And here's a great example of the breed right here, the birth of the Chrysler 300. Now we move over to 1957. You can see where Virgil Exner's styling touches began to really take flight, and I do mean flight as in flight wing styling. That's what they called the forward look. And these wings, the tail fins right here, would put any 57 Chevy or Ford Fairlane to shame. They're beautiful. Virgil Exner's best work. And we can see right here the 300C logo right there. And these were called the Letter Series 300s. They were built from 1955 through 65, the letter cars, and Chrysler called them the beautiful brutes. They were beautiful, but they were also very brutish. This one here is the big 392 Hemi under the hood, again with dual quads. By this point in time, 370 horsepower, standard trim. There were some upgrades with optional camshafts, but 370 horsepower, which was more than any Corvette would ever make at this point in time, and any Ford would ever make either at this point in time. 1957, the Detroit horsepower race was off and running, with these 300s being great examples of the breed. Now they're full-size cars, which means they were, sold to upscale buyers who wanted sporting flair in their luxury cars. And they're very special cars in many ways. Let's bring in Mike McCandless for a special word on these two cars and what makes them so unique.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Thank you for coming. Yeah, this car is really, really unique. I mean, there's Chrysler 300 convertibles, and then there's this one. Obviously, being a serial number 1, the very first one built. It was an early production car as far as compared to when the rest of them were built. And back in that time, the whole idea of race on Sunday, win on Monday was the campaign that was starting to come. And at the time in the mid-50s, Keffer was the #1 guy in racing, particularly with, some
Keffer, of course, the maker of outboard motors, Mercury outboard motors,
right.
Mercury company, but
right.
Mercury
yeah,
outboard
exactly.
motors. That's where he made his fortune. And
right, exactly. And he had been a big supporter with Chrysler, which we'll talk about with the VIN 1 car. But he was actually given this car to have around Daytona when they were running the earlier races. And so this car being the first one built, it's the only one that was ever built with bucket seats. Most of the production models, they all came with a bench seat. It has a 140 mile an hour speedometer in it instead of the 120. And there's some other kind of really cool things, like for instance, underneath the hood, the hood latch mechanism, they did a 2-clamp locking situation because they knew they were going to use this car for all of their advertising and promo work that would come. in 1957. And I can actually show you this, which is really pretty cool. But when you go through the old magazines and see the old advertisements, this is the same car.
This same thing.
Exact same thing, yep. And so they would use it in the promo work, and then Keith Keffer was given the car to be able to drive around. And then eventually it ends up in circulation and gets restored later on, and ended up with me. And the reason why I bought this car was because I had this very special car over here. To me, within the Chrysler world, I mean, I am biased because obviously I have the car, but to me, this is one of the most important Chrysler cars that exist. Obviously, being a serial #1 car, the racing history, that's there, and the fact we've been able to preserve all of that. So, first Chrysler 300 built. It was built about 6 to 8 weeks before VIN number 3 gets built. So they build VIN 1 and VIN 2. Brewster Shaw gets this car, which is the VIN number 1 car, and Keith Keffer would get the VIN number 2 car, which Flock would end up driving and winning the race at Daytona that year. This car comes in second with Lee Petty driving it. And it's really cool. I'll show you some pictures. We have a picture of Richard actually by the car at 17 years old, which is really neat. And there were some, very unusual things about the car, like the air cleaner, instead of having the typical ribs on it, this one actually was smooth, which VIN 2 was done the same way, but the later production ones, ended up having the ribs and stuff in it. And, I wouldn't say I found this car found me. A guy named Josh Ackerman had done a lot of work, did a lot of history, finding all of it, and did a great job actually having this as a running car prior to me getting a hold of it. And then I had Whitehall Restoration do a complete restoration on the car. We had everything hand lettered on it. I'm not one that shows cars, but this one I actually did debut at McCandless, and scored unbelievably. And it's just really cool to be able to have a VIN number 1, and then one that's in process right now, which is a 1958 Chrysler 300D, serial number 1, which makes it really special. But what makes it even more special is the first fuel-injected car that Chrysler had built, and we have it actually running with all the original equipment. So, but that's for a later day. But I can show you over here. You can actually see we spent a lot of time gathering up old photos. We have a massive library of information showing the car actually being driven. So this is, Brewster Shaw. This is the owner of the dealer at San Juan Motors. This was used as the central area for all of the cars during that week to be serviced and prepared, which is why he was able to actually get this car. This is Vicky Wood. Back then, they actually ran a women's division where they would do speed time trials just like the men. So there wasn't just a race where you would race the 4 miles. They also had just a flat out top speed challenge. And Vicky in the women's division actually won in this car. And so, there's Brewster Shaw there, which we have an autographed picture of. This is some of the time trial stuff. And then actual race images running along the bottom. And then there's old Richard Petty right there at a young 17 years old as they're preparing. And you can see they were getting it race ready, taping off everything on the front and all that for any little advantage you could have. So it's really cool having somebody like you here who gives so much background and information on these cars, way beyond stuff that I know. I'm trying to take care of these cars and do the best that I can. And so hearing you and teaching me so much these past couple of days has been really special. And if you enjoy this content, and this is the type of stuff you like to follow, please like, subscribe, rate, review, all of the things that we're doing here. Is we're going to continue to produce content throughout the year. So Steve, I'd like to thank you very much for coming here, and looking forward to doing some more stuff with you.